I actually am a really big ebook reader, and I got into this topic when I got my first Kindle in for Christmas 2010. And I actually started really getting into the whole, I'm kind of giving this backstory because it actually matters. I started getting into really into the ebook stuff. And then my dog died in 2014 and it was all tied up. I was doing something then. And to be honest, I put this project down and I haven't really looked at it for 6 years. And so then I decided it was time to do something, and Andrea gave me this opportunity. So that's why, we're going to see that this really is create a basic ebook class, but this is something that you can do, and we'll talk a little bit about why you might want to do something like this. So what I'm going to do is, let me go ahead and open up the chat because I'm going to have to pop a link in for you all. So we're going to go over to, I'm going to close out the library page, and you can see that I have a page for us, and I'm going to take the link and I'm going to pop it in the chat box so that everyone has it. There we are, creating basic ebooks. And now I'm going to minimize the chat because it always goes right over everything I'm going to do. Okay. So you can see this is a little bit about all of that. So let's kind of quickly go over the FAQ. We're going to see that this is really basic. We're not gonna be talking about an extent, fancy ebooks or footnotes or anything else like that. We're also going to leave tables of contents out completely because of the way that I do this. I do these. You start using Google Docs, and for some reason, if you create a table of content in Google Docs, or if you put it in a Microsoft Word file and upload it to Google Docs, when you download it, it's gone. So we're not actually going to be as sophisticated as tables of contents for this. So when I talk about an ebook, I really mean anything that you can read on a screen. I'm going to talk about eDocs and ebooks, and we'll kind of jumble them both together. And I use this really broadly. We're going to see that in creating ebooks, one, that a lot of this is actually sending stuff to your ebook or making it so you can read it a little bit easier or something else like that. And then we're going to kind of go through a couple ways of creating eDocs and ebooks. We'll learn about some software. I'll give you some information that you can use to find out more about this if you want to join me on my journey to actually being able to go from creating basic ebooks to something a little bit more. Okay. So we'll go ahead to our next tab, what is an ebook? And I want to talk a little bit about ebook formats because this is kind of important for ebooks broadly. And I'm not going to go to that link, but basically what an ebook really is it's a web page, and it's basically a zipped up web page. There are two main formats. The general format EPUB, and then there is Amazon's format, which is based upon an open standard called Mobi, but they have a proprietary standard. But virtually everybody else works with the ebook standard. Amazon kind of is on its own. There's a lot of layers of complications, though. If you're buying them from a vendor, Apple has its own flavor of ebook, and Barnes & Noble has its own flavor of ebook or EPUBs. And the thing that's kind of giving them these own flavors is the notion of digital rights management. And digital rights management is a thing that when you're using a library ebook, you can only have it for 3 days or something. You can't copy it. There's all those restrictions around it. So I like to think of a bottle of Coke, Diet Coke in this case, is kind of a good metaphor for it. What's inside the beverage itself is what you consume or you read in an ebook. The bottle is, the thing that literally holds it all together. And the wrapper is the digital rights management. It's a thing in this case that says this is a product of Coke. That means you can get it here, but you can't get it there because Coke has all these contracts. So it's kind of a good metaphor for how ebooks work. Okay. That's kind of the backstory, and I'm doing it kind of briefly because I want to make sure we have plenty of time for everything else that I'm doing. But I wanted to make sure nobody had any questions right now. Okay, let's see. So far, so good. Okay, great. Okay, so let's go in and talk a little bit about e-documents. And so when I talk about e-documents, I'm thinking usually of something that is, kind of shorter. It might be an article, it might be a how-to, it might be something else. And it's a lot easier to read some of these things sometimes on phones and tablets than it is to read them on the web. And we'll see why in just a little bit. But sometimes it's because you may want to read it later when you're standing in line at Starbucks and you don't have very much charge on your phone. It's really nice to be able to read something that actually doesn't require an internet connection and has a good reading experience that you knew you wanted to read. So those are some ideas. So when I taught this 6 years ago, it was really interesting. We've kind of gone backwards in the 6 years since I really dealt with this, because at that time in 2013, 2014, there were a number of different journal platforms that actually allowed you to download an article in EPUB format, which has some real affordances that we're going to discover as we go along. But as I kind of looked at this to kind of, update it, I found that a lot of those places that used to allow you to download an article as an EPUB don't have that anymore. And I don't know why. Maybe not enough people took advantage of it or whatever, but that's something that's kind of really gone the wayside. So I thought this would be a good place to talk about why you might want to do this. So one thing is, sometimes it's easier to read things on a small screen or a tablet. And when we're talking about e-documents, and I'm going to be demonstrating ones that you get from the web, we're going to see that it gives you a much better experience too. No ads, no automatic opening up videos, anything else like that, just a very clean reading experience. One thing that can be really nice, especially as we get into the more creating our own ebooks, is that you have the ability to change your font size and actually have the same experience. And that's a big deal. I have old eyes. I actually really like as much as I can to have a sepia background and a pretty big font. That's why my face is so big. I'm so close to my monitor, unfortunately. So it's nice to have that reflowable text, unlike a PDF. If I have a PDF and I'm looking at on a phone that's about this big, my PDF isn't reflowable. The size is the size. So I have to sit there and, maximize it for every little bit and then kind of move it around. It's as bad as working with microfiche if you kind of go back to that technology. So it's really, really unpleasant. One thing too is that, an ebook that's downloaded onto your device, your phone or your tablet, takes virtually no power to read. If you can. Standing in Starbucks, you can catch up and not use very much power, even if you don't have an internet connection, even if you have very little power on your phone or your tablet. And finally, you get to take advantage of the affordances offered by dedicated e-readers and tablets, smartphones, et cetera. And that includes, annotation, or those things like, making your information so there's less margin, making more space between your words, et cetera. So you get a lot of things like that. So, a lot of things that we now read as PDFs or we read on our computer screen, if you think about it, it's actually something that would actually be really nice if I could actually read it on my phone or my tablet and be able to search it and do all those sorts of things. And if you think about it, what are the documents that you refer to all the time that are on your computer? Why not think about converting them to ebooks? And that's what we're going to do now. All right. So here is our first type of ebook. And this one is really going to be more along the lines of our e-docs. So what we're talking about here is kind of things that we find on the web that we would like to read. Maybe we want to read them later and we would like to have a better reading experience. So I'm going to show you my first one, which is Instapaper. And so I'm going to go over to this website. This is from BuzzFeed. This is really interesting. And what I'm going to do is I have this Instapaper app that's downloaded on my browser, and I'm going to click it. When I click it, you can see it's saving it to my Instapaper. And if I then go over to Instapaper and hit refresh, this is not my usual Instapaper account. This is one I created like 10 years ago. So you can see, very old. But let's take a look. Here's my video. Now here it is, in BuzzFeed, and you got all those ads, and there's all that going on. Here it is in Instapaper with my sepia background. Calm, nice, easy. There's all those pictures, and if there's text there. If there are links, the links work. It's just a much better experience. And I have a lot of functionality that I can do. And I'm doing this on my desktop, but I have even more functionality if I download it on a phone or a tablet, actually. But you can see I can actually go over here and I can say, I'm going to have the TISA font and I want it to be a little bit bigger. And you can see I really like to have something smaller like this. And there's a lot of eye stuff going on with this. Think about how you read a document. I have a big monitor, and if I'm reading everything on my document, I'm reading like this, and that's really awful because I have to read with my neck. The more I can push things in like I did here, I can do more reading with my eyes because it's much smaller. I have, it's much narrower. So it's a much better experience. So this gives me that ability to do this. And let's try another document that has a little bit more text. I'm going to go back over, and here we are. I'm going to add it to Instapaper. Go back over to my Instapaper, which is actually still open. And you can see there's all the pictures, there's a text, much easier to read. If there's links, oops, I'm still on CNN. Sorry, I didn't actually add it. There we are. Let's go back over to Instapaper. There we are. We'll see the links all work, but I get rid of all of that nasty stuff. I sometimes lose a couple images, but most of the time it really doesn't matter to me. All right, so whoops, let's see, here we are. Let me find out where we went here. Okay. So there's a lot you can do with this. Now, something else that I can do with this, let's go actually look at this, is if I want to, I'm going to go back over to my, my settings. I can actually go to my settings, and if I wanted to, I could download these. I could download a number of items into Kindle format or EPUB format or a printable, which is kind of nice if I want to share things that are a little bit less obnoxious than what I see. I could also, if I go over to my settings, actually work with this to actually send this stuff to my Kindle, where I can read it at my leisure in a better experience, being able to change the fonts, etc. Or I can read it on my Kindle app, which is really nice as well. If I didn't want to read it on Instapaper's own app for whatever reason. So you can see, now I can get more affordances if I actually pay. And my real account, I actually pay. I get so much value out of this that it's worth the money for me. And so it's just really nice. I can have articles be read out loud. I can do all sorts of cool things. Okay, so then there's another one that's very similar, which is a Pocket. And we're going to do this. We're going to look at Pocket over here. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to go over to our It's Not Just You, and I'm going to go ahead and add it to Pocket. And if you use Firefox, by the way, Pocket is built into Firefox. So I've gone ahead and added it. Nice thing about Pocket is that I can tag stuff. And to be honest, if I were actually starting this from scratch, I probably would be working with Pocket instead of Instapaper because of the ability to tag, because I'm a really big fan of tagging. There it is, and you can see same sort of thing. I have the ability to change how things look, and if I pay them, I can unlock. I don't pay them, I pay Instapaper, but it's really worth the money for me to actually do that. Okay, so let's go back to our page. If you could also just use Amazon Send to Kindle thing directly, which does many similar things. So I'm going to go over to our, let's do our doggy page. And I'm just going to use my Send to Kindle app that I set up. And I can preview it, which is nice. I get a sense of what it's going to look like. And then I can go ahead and choose to send it. And then once I send it, it'll take a little bit of time, but you can see this is going to show up on my Kindle, my Kindle device and online, and it's going to be kind of in this format. You'll notice this way we lost a few of the pictures doing it this way. It's always, you never quite get everything exactly, but it's usually good enough for my mind. Okay, so you might say, well, I have a different device. I have a Nook or I have a Kobo. And I don't know why. It's something to do with how these are structured, but there isn't the ability to send to Kobo or send to Nook. But what you can do is you can download stuff. We saw how you can download it Instapaper. You can do something similar in Pocket. And then you can basically what they call sideload, which is hook your Nook or your Kobo e-reader up with a USB cable and literally transfer things over that way. So that's possible as well. Now there's some other options as well. Sometimes, you just want to create a document on the fly, and that's why we have these online converters. Now, this is really important These online converters means that your document is going to be on somebody else's server. So nothing proprietary, nothing personal, nothing, anything like that. But it's really handy if you just need to do something fast. And I put a couple of them down. This one actually goes up here. I forgot. This one and TUIPub. If I had to use one, and I have occasionally when I wanted something on the fly, I would use this one online converter. But with them, I'm not going to, definitely not going to install this. You have to be really careful. See, this one has a lot less of the really weird ads and stuff, and it's, you know, much more easier. But you still want to be really, you still want to make sure that you're not actually putting anything proprietary on. If we were to actually go back and look at the other one on my list, we're going to see that it's really scary looking, to be honest, because it's going to have ads all over. I actually got rid of some of the ones that had the really bad ads, but you know, there's lots of ads. Sometimes you have to be a little bit careful about precisely what you're clicking on. So, you know, honestly, there are easier ways to do this that I'm going to show you, but I did want you to be aware of this because it's something you can do on the fly really quickly, and can be kind of handy. Okay, so those are our kind of our type ones, and this really is kind of, you know, creating a document, etc. With Pocket has this app, P2K over here, and what that does actually is this is how you can actually send things to your Kindle. You can send a group of them, and if you don't pay, it's limited. You can do it 5 times a week, and you have to do it manually, but it's nice. You can basically kind of you know, just grab a bunch of things off your Pocket and send them to your Kindle as well. So lots of possibilities. All right, so that's kind of the basic stuff. What we're going to do now is we're going to move into some of the more complicated things. But I wanted, first of all, I just had a question to see how many people were actually using something like, let me move this over so I can actually see the chat. How many people were using something like Instapaper or Pocket? Anybody doing that? Because I really recommend it. It's life-changing, actually. Yeah, these are really great services. And I think you could see just from the demos that I showed that the experience of reading is so much better. And it's so much easier on your eye, whether you're reading on your device or if you're reading on your laptop. It's just a much better experience. And I really, really, really recommend it. To be honest, a lot of times the most important thing about it, though, is actually moving it. You know, I mean, I could send it to my email, but if you're anything like me, that's the great black hole. You know, you'll never see it again. Whereas if I send it to my Pocket or to my Instapaper, then I can go get it on my phone, you know, and it's much more easy, and I actually don't lose stuff that's really important. Both of them also allow me to annotate and to extract my annotations, which is something that I want to do every so often as well. Although there are better ways to annotate, and maybe we'll talk about that in another Global Connections webinar at some point. Okay, so let's go over and talk about where we're really going to spend most of our time here, which is actually creating basic ebooks too. And what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of get into doing this. We're going to start in Google Docs, and we're going to create an ebook there. And I've got a lot of it done. We're going to then open it up in Sigil. I never remember how to pronounce it, Sigil. And we're going to actually use that to do just a very little bit of editing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to open it up in Calibri, and here we can actually organize it so we have it in a nice directory structure. We can actually change format if we want, or do some other sorts of things. And then we'll talk a little bit about some other possibilities. Okay. So these are all free, by the way, although of course, you know, you can also give money to the creators as well. So we're going to move over to Google Docs. And I went to Project Gutenberg, one of my favorite sites, and there's this really delightful fairy tale written by Charles Dickens called The Magic Fishbone. And it's absolutely freaking delightful. And in Project Gutenberg, you can see there's a number of versions of it. I don't really have to create it in ePub because I can do it. I can just download it here. But this is where I actually got my document. And I pasted it in Google Docs. Now, what I could have also done is actually do it in Microsoft Word and then upload it to Google Docs. But I found that if I started with Microsoft Word and uploaded it to Google Docs, then I couldn't do any editing in Sigil because for some reason, it actually sensed that at some point it had been a Google Doc. So it just doesn't work. At least I couldn't make it work. Okay, so I've actually already done a little bit. I created this really basics. You can see this is an image, and I pasted it at the top because this is going to be my book's cover. And then you can see here, I have all my text. There's some things I'm going to do. Even though I can't put a table of contents right now, I want to make a table of contents ready. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually go ahead and use some styling so that at some point when I can create a table of contents, I'll be actually able to find all the metadata. So what I'm doing is I gave that a title heading, and I'm making this heading 1. To be honest, I've never done very much with headings, but they're actually really useful. You can do some really cool things with them, especially in Microsoft Word and in terms of generating tables of contents and doing some other sorts of things. If I downloaded this as a regular document in Google Docs, I would, oops, I've lost my chapter 2 here. No, here it is. There we are, chapter 2, and I'm making this a heading 1 as well. All right, so that's the first thing I want to do. The second thing I'm going to do is actually just to demonstrate this, I'm going to go ahead and capture the link for this in Project Gutenberg, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to make our, we'll make this into a link. So I'm going to insert and we'll put in our link and I will paste it in. And then I always have to remember this part because I don't. So there's a link because we're going to see that we can put links in and they're going to be live as well. All right, let's add in an image. So I'm going to go back to this one, and I'm going to open it up in HTML. And Google Docs allows me to add in images a number of different ways. A really kind of fun one that they enable you to do is, let's see if I had a picture over here. No, let's add in that first picture. Okay, what I can do here is I'm going to go ahead and copy the image link. And then when I go back, I'm going to go find where I want my image to be, which is going to be, I'll put it right here. And I'm going to insert my image. You can see I can do it a number of different ways, but I love the fact that I can put it in by URL. So let's do that. And there it is. I'm going to insert it. And then I'm going to kind of make it a little bit smaller. There we are. And then I want to make sure it's centered. It is centered. That's good. Let's make sure this is centered as well. Okay, centered. Yes, it is. And I could make it a little bit less long, but it looks okay. So we'll leave it at that. And then I'm just going to kind of, get rid of a few of these spaces that I kind of added here. Okay. What else do I want to do? Let's see, I've added an image, I've added a link. Let's add in some page numbers. And that's going to be really important, especially if you actually create something that you might be using for scholarly work. So I'm going to go over to Insert, and let's go find page numbers. I will put them in without it being on the cover page. There we are. Now I'll have my page numbers. And so let's see, I've added an image, I've added a link. I put in my headers and I've put in page numbers. So there's a lot of space here. But honestly, it's actually kind of nice because one of the things I find about reading things on documents is you don't want stuff to be too cramped. You want a more white space so you can see it. So you can see that if we actually go over to our file menu and go over to print, so we can kind of look and see this, we'll see that I also put in page breaks. I use Google Docs to put in page breaks. So it very clearly has delineated pages for all my items, all my chapters, etc., the way it would normally be. Now, it has this now, but we're going to see that we're going to lose a lot of this when we actually move over to our document. Because I said this was a basic class, I actually have not figured it yet how to actually keep those spaces in an ebook. I mean, I kind of know, but it has to do with actually creating separate files and having them all stitched together. But that takes too long anyway, and we wanted to keep this basic. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to say, so I don't get this mixed up, I'm going to say, whoops, I'm going to drop my monitor, my keyboard, class. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to file and I'm going to download as an EPUB. And it's going to show up down here at some place, and I have to move all of this stuff around. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it, open it in a folder. Just to make things easier, I'm going to copy it, copy, and I'm going to paste it in this particular folder, which is kind of our working folder. You can see some of the other things that I did there, but we are the Magic Fishbone class. Okay, so now we're ready to go to the next step. So I'm going to shut all this down so you can see everything on my screen. Come on. That's going to cause problems later on. I don't know why it won't close. Okay, so I'm going to open up Sigil. And Sigil is a free and open source ebook editor. And you can also create ebooks in as well. Now, the nice thing about Sigil is that it used to have actually a built-in what you see is what you get editor, but now it's separate. And I had to do a little bit of working to actually make it show up. But I've put a video in, and I'll show you the link. I put a video in our guide showing you how you can launch the external editor. But you want the external editor because otherwise you're in code view, which requires knowing HTML. And so the thing is that if you really want to get into ebooks, you end up having to learn HTML, and it doesn't hurt to learn some regular expressions, unless you want to pay the big bucks and use an ebook maker like InDesign or something else like that. So I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to open my document. So let's see, here we are, the Magic ebook class. Notice that it clearly says it's an EPUB. Okay. And it's gonna fix some of my HTML, which is good. All right, so you can see now, here it is. This is my preview over here, and I can see what it looks like. And I see that my title, which I very carefully centered, is not centered anymore. So that's going to be our big edit for this particular thing. So I'm going to go into the edit window, and in a second, my editor is going to show up. Okay, here it is. And I've got to kind of move things around. And here I can actually do your basic, what you see is what you get editing, which is the best kind to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight my title and I'm going to center it. Let's see, I could make it bold if I want. And let's do, let's make Miss Alice Rainbird italicized. So I could go in and make some other changes at this point if I wanted to, but that's a couple to show that I've done some editing. So I'm just going to take a minute and walk through some of the options over here. You can see I opened a file. I'm going to save it. That's going to be really important. And then I have your basic, cut and paste, bulleted list. I can insert characters. I can set my levels up for things. There's a number of different things that I can do. And then I also have my file menu. And I keep on thinking that split marker might have something to do with getting things on separate pages, but so far, no. And I think there's a different, I actually need to do more reading into all the how-to books I'm going to actually show you. But you can see some basic sorts of stuff. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save it. Let's go ahead and file, save. Now it's really, and then I'm going to go ahead and move I'm going to minimize it. And I need to come back over here and I'm going to look at it, and you can see it's not centered here yet because I haven't saved it. But, I'm going to go back and check that, make sure, did I actually center it? Yes, I did. I centered it and I saved it. Okay, that should do it. Hopefully we actually will get that properly centered. Yeah, actually that is centered now that I look at it. Okay, and you can see there's all the code view, and this is where I could do things in code view if I wanted to. I could actually put in a table of contents in the code view if I knew the HTML for that, because I've set it up for that because I have the headings, but I actually don't know that. And you can see there's a bundle of other things that I can do over here. There's some, basic WYSIWYG stuff, but a lot of this is going to be, sort of adding existing files for creating documents. So there's a lot of checkpoints, which has to do with validating your code and kind of getting a sense of where you are. But you can see there's a number of plugins that you can get that kind of give you more the ability to do more stuff, etc. But we've done kind of what I really care about for now. So we're going to go ahead and save it. Okay, and we'll check. Okay, centered. All right, we're done with Sigil. And I'm just going to minimize it, but I could have closed it. And if we go back and look in our folder, oops, wrong one. Let's go back up to here. We'll see that we actually have, there we are, 6 o'clock is our time. And that's the time that, we just updated it. So we definitely know that this is a saved version. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at this right now. And I probably should have done this before I went into Sigil, but we didn't make any big changes in Sigil. Let's look at what we have so far. So what I'm going to do is, first thing I want to do is I'm going to open it with a Bluefire Reader. And Bluefire Reader is actually my preferred ebook reader. But what I found is that although it's going to work for us here, or should in a second, it really doesn't like these kind of created ebooks. I really had I had a hard time. I couldn't get it to work at all on my phone, on my Bluefire app on my phone. And it was kind of a pain in the neck in the Bluefire app on my iPad. But we can see that we could actually, we could actually read it in Bluefire. There's, our title page, and there's our link. And if I go ahead and click on it, it'll work. Maybe not in Bluefire, but it will in something else. So Bluefire is not precisely my favorite anymore. And you'll notice the formatting is a little bit weird. Part of that is actually kind of the strength of EPUB is the flowability, the ability to, regardless of what font you're looking at, et cetera, just have the text flow. But because I don't know yet how to actually, separate my things, everything flows together. So its strength is, in this particular case, a weakness, but I said it was basic ebook class, and I mean it's basic ebook class. So there we are. Okay, but you can see I can read this, etc. And if I want to in Bluefire Reader, I do have the ability to annotate. I can highlight. Actually, there we are. I can highlight. I can do other sorts of things as well if I want to. There we are. Okay, so we've looked at it in Bluefire. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at it in Adobe Digital Editions. And the important thing about Bluefire and Adobe Digital Editions is that to use them, you create an Adobe account, and you can then read digital rights management ebooks. Actually, with Adobe, you don't have to, but you don't have to have an account. But then you can only use your device, you can only access it on one device. So everything is always more complicated than it looks. But we're going to go ahead and open it in ADE. Okay, I thought I just did that, but apparently I didn't. Here we are. Okay, and in a second. And one thing about ADE is that I have to make sure, if I want to make sure, you'll see at the end, I'm going to maneuver in it, just go page by page. There it is. I think I kind of would like to maybe fiddle around with that spacing a little bit, and I can do that, kind of change the spacing to 1.5 instead of all that, because there's actually a little bit too much white space in there. But you can see there's my document, and I have the same ability to, I can bump up the size here if we want to make it large. Come on, do that for me. Oh, it's not open from the library. I have to copy it to the library to be able to do that. That's something that actually I've screwed up on before. I've opened stuff up in ADE and assumed that it was saved in the library, and it wasn't, unless I make sure to save it. And then I can actually, do all the sorts of cool things in it, etc. And you can see now, if I go back to my library, here is our version of the Magic Fishbone. Okay, so we've just kind of looked at it. In a little bit, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and look at it on my phone and on a tablet. Not this particular one, but something that I've done before, just so we can see that experience. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to go over and look at Calibri. So we started Calibri. I always pronounce it that way. So we started off, we created it in Google Docs. We could have created it in Sigil. We could have created it in Calibri, but Google Docs is actually the easiest way to do it, because we all know how to do it. It's what you see is what you get. You don't have to know coding. It just makes it a lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead now, and I'm going to open up Calibri once I find it here. Okay. And this is just a really great program. And the thing is that if you're like me, you may actually have ebooks already. You'll see that I have some textbooks, that I've actually been able to download. One of the really cool things about Taylor and Francis ebooks is that they don't have DRM, and you can download the whole ebook, which I have done, as you can see, for a couple of these things. And I'm going to show you, it's really important if you do download a whole ebook to actually make a note to yourself so that you can prove it if somebody, comes after you for whatever reason. But we'll talk about that when we look at metadata. So what I'm going to do now is, you can see this is my directory, and I haven't done very much with it because this is a relatively new computer, and there's a lot of things that I didn't install. If we were on my old computer, it would have looked a lot different, but I have to kind of catch up on doing things like tags and metadata, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and add the ebook that we've created. So I'm going to go find it. Here we are. Ours was Magic Fishbone class. Open up. And you can see it's adding it. And it'll just take a few minutes. Okay, there it is. So the first thing we want to do is we want to fix the metadata. Also, you can see the cover. We want to fix that cover as well, because it didn't actually pull out that first page was my cover field, because it was just a page. It didn't have the HTML tag that told it that it was its cover. Didn't matter, it doesn't really matter for a lot of things because it's the first page that comes up. But if we want to do a more formal ebook, we really want to have something that's really specified as the cover. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the metadata. And that means let's go ahead and spell out the magic fishbone correctly. And we're going to put it in as the author is Charles Dickens. E-N-S? You'd think I would know that. Okay. And let's see. I'm going to give it a tag for fairy tale. Later on, this will really help me if I want to find, oops, I put in cap there, fairy tale. You can see the date, published. You can see I have for this, I didn't really publish this. I don't know the publisher, etc. Here's my comments field, and you can see it's a what you see is what you get comments field. This is where I'm going to put in any notes. So if I was able to download an ebook from the library site, DRM free, I'm going to actually put in a note for this. In fact, what I do, just to be on the safe side, is I use Zotero. I actually make sure to add it into Zotero, add the page that shows that I legally downloaded it. Because I do, you do think at some point that, somebody might come after you going, probably not, but it doesn't hurt. Notice there's a few things that I can do here as well with the cover. So what I'm going to do is, even though I already have the cover in, I'm going to actually go and I'm going to find my bad cover that I created. And I'm just going to put it in there. So, okay, I think we've got this now. We're good there. Okay, so I'm okay with that. I've got some metadata. I put in a tag. All right, we have some good stuff there. I gave it a star. Somehow I missed when I gave it a star, but I did. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that I can do now. One thing that I can do is I can go ahead and edit my book. Now, editing, to be honest, editing it in Calibri is actually not as good of an experience as editing it in Sigil, because you don't have a real true what you see is what you get editor. It's actually much more about the code. I've also noticed that it kind of has a lot of, it's more likely to put in a lot of junk HTML. So, that happens. But here we are, and I can go look at this, and it's going to load me a preview. And you can see I have options over here. There's my cover, there's my forward. Here I have some basic sorts of things that I can do. There's bold. Here's the rest of my menu over here. And then this gives me some other stuff that I can do that might be, sort of larger sorts of things. This is having to do with the HTML. And you can see here's like my images. So since the cover image one is the same as the cover image, but it knows that this one is the same, so it's not actually showing up twice, which is something that I worried would happen. But you can see this is, then here's my fonts that I can fiddle with. There's some stuff. I'm not using styles, but I can do stuff in here. But at the very beginning, I really recommend doing your fixing in Sigil, because, or however it's pronounced, because it's a little bit easier to work with. But the more you learn HTML, the more you learn regular expressions. There's a lot of really cool things that you could do with this. Okay, so I actually didn't make any changes, so I'm just going to close it out, and I'm going to close this whole thing out. Now let's talk about some of the other really cool things that Calibri can do. One of these is, you can see that it's an EPUB. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and I'm going to convert it. I'm going to actually make it to a Mobi file so that I can read it on my Kindle. And I am going to side load it, but I could actually set it up as a server so it automatically sends the file to my Kindle if I wanted to. And you can see there's a number of things here. We've kind of got our metadata. There's a number of things here that you can kind of play around with. There's some room for tables of contents. I'm not sure this is going to work for me, but we'll go ahead and put it in to see if it happens. And I don't think it's going to happen because we our table of contents, we have the formatting. So I might as well not even do this. We have the formatting for it, but they are not actually linked. But well, let's see if this works. I don't think it will. I think I tried this before and it didn't work. So there's some other things that I can do. This is where I would use regular expressions if I wanted to do some editing. This might be, I might do this if I were say had a document that was 2 columns and I wanted to convert it into a document that was 1 column. I might use regular expressions or something like that. But for now, what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to start off with EPUB, and you can see I can change it to all of these different formats. There's PDF there. So I'm going to go ahead and change it to Mobi. I can actually change it to Word as well. And I'm going to click on OK. And you'll notice down there, it's actually changing. And in a minute, I'm going to have a Mobi file too. So I'm actually going to, I'm going to look at the chat, see if there's anything I need to. Yeah, you can edit it. As long, basically, if an ebook does not have digital rights management, you should be able to edit it. Whether or not you should edit it is a whole different question, which gets into some really interesting issues that we don't have time to talk about right now. But okay, so let's kind of show an example, another example. And by the way, also all these cool things that I can do with this that we're not talking about. We've looked at adding and editing metadata and converting, but here you can see I can view. These are all things that I've done before. I can view with it. Here I can get books. I could actually automatically look for books from particular stores. This is I can give the developer of this money. They've actually got it set up to download news if I want. Here I can remove books, but I can also do that from the right-click menu. This is my library. Save to disk, we'll do that in a little bit. Here's my preferences. I might want to, change things in a little bit. I want to make it so that it always just creates a Mobi instead of everything. Okay, so just some basic sorts of things. So just to show you this, I'm gonna as an experiment, so we have a little bit of time, I'm gonna go over here, and one of these actually is a PDF that I did earlier. And let's see what happens with the PDF. Okay, we're gonna say, okay. There we are. All right, so you see PDF. Let's go ahead and see what it looks like. Okay, notice it opened it in my PDF reader, and it's a proper PDF, so the pages should all be right. But let's see what happens when we go ahead and convert it. We're gonna convert it to EPUB. And I'm not gonna fiddle around with the metadata at this point. I'm just gonna do this. Notice I also, I can look at HTML code for my notes as well. Okay, so I made it into an EPUB. Let's see what it looks like. There we are, EPUB. I'll be curious to see whether or not it actually retained my page breakages. So you can see that Calibri also has an ebook viewer. So in addition to being able to view things in Bluefire or Adobe Digital Editions, here it is. And I'm just gonna go ahead and I can just move my page. Oh, there we are. And you can see this was actually a version of this before I did a lot of the converting. So I think this doesn't have, my headings are not there, etc. There's a little bit, but there it is. And it's pretty basic, but it works. So you could actually use this to convert PDFs as long as they didn't have, 2 columns. Now, the other thing that's really important is when we talk about images. I actually just put in a couple of images, but there might be a time when you might want to add in something that was a table or a figure. And the thing is that a lot of times with tables, we basically use a table function word to create them. You can't do that with this because it's just going to mess everything up. The only things you put in have to be an image. So your figures and your tables have to be things that are in, JPEG or other sorts of image files so that they will work. And there's, ways where you can easily convert something into an image. But you can see this actually isn't bad. And now, and it's a lot easier to read this on my phone or my tablet than it is to read a PDF because I'm going to have the affordances of being able to change the font and have that reflowable font, which I don't get in a PDF because a PDF is always like, what is on this page is on this page. So kind of nice. All right, so just kind of to show you all of that. Okay, so the next step would be kind of the proving step. And for this, I'm going to go ahead and save to disk. And I'm going to go ahead and you can see I have to choose a folder. So I'll put it in unknown. Oops, I did the wrong one. I didn't want to save that. I wanted to save this one. Let's try this again. We're going to go ahead and save it to disk. Put it in unknown. Select folder. Copy files. Now I'm going to go find my directory structure here. Go back over here, move around all these files. I think I put it in unknown. Okay, known. There we are. There it is. And see, it's separate. This is the EPUB file. This is the cover file. And this is a different version of it that I could also work with. Now, at this point, what I'm going to do, I'm not actually going to do this, but I want to kind of show you how I would work with how it shows up. So, you know, I can't, if I set up the server and everything, I can actually just send this stuff to my phone and everything, but I haven't done this. So what I would do is I would literally just email this to myself at this point, you know, kind of working up to that is kind of my next stage. Maybe I'll offer a medium ebooks class or something else like that. But I'm actually, you can see, here's my phone, and you can see there it is. I'm going to put it so you can actually see there it is. And you know, and notice, you know, because I didn't really do the page as a real file, the page isn't separate. And I'm kind of moving, see if I can get this right. This is kind of hard to do. There, that's a lot better if I hold it with this hand. And you can see, there it is, and I can just work my way through it. And the other thing I can do is if I want, let's go in. You know, I could see my images. If this one I didn't put an image in, but I could also go into it and change my font, and then it's going to have that flowable thing that I was talking about. So, okay, I actually, for this, I told you I wasn't able to actually make this work with Bluefire Reader. So I'm actually using a separate ebook file, ebook reader file called FB Reader. And it's pretty basic. You have to give them a little bit of money to get the better version of it. But, you know, it kind of does the basic sorts of things. I didn't do the research that I did in the past about ebook readers because there's a lot of really interesting ones out there that might give you more affordances than my basic FB Reader does. I might look at, I used to use something called Aldico that I think allowed you to annotate, but I was kind of doing this in a hurry, so I didn't do that. Let's look at it in on my iPad. And we're definitely going to have a better experience there because, you know, everything looks better on a bigger screen. Now, this one I'm actually looking at in iBooks instead of Bluefire Reader because, you know, it works in Bluefire Reader, but it's a little bit, the experience is a little bit easier in iBooks. And I can do the same thing. I can just kind of go page to page. And you notice it actually did a little bit better job of actually paginating things the way that I want them. I could increase the font and make it flowable. Sorry, you guys can't see that. But there it is. See all that space? That's just too much space, I think. I think I would actually really want to make it like a between my paragraphs, maybe you know, a space and a half or something else like that. But lots of things that you can do. And I just want you to think about this a little bit because once we start thinking, once we realize how easy it is to make a basic ebook, now I'm not talking fancy, you know, if you want fancy, I'll show you some resources you can do for that if you actually wanted to create an ebook and sell it. But, you know, if you want to create an ebook of, you know, pictures and annotations to send to your grandmother who actually reads ebooks and so has ebook software, this is really cool. But it also really turns into something that's handy for you because it enables you to, you know, put information in a different format and make it easier. And I have always felt that this is something that really is very powerfully valuable for global students because you know, a lot of you are actually taking classes, you know, kind of and working, and maybe, you know, you have to do things kind of, you know, in little dribs and drabs. So it might actually be really valuable to be able to easily read something in an easy way while you're standing in line at Starbucks, and, you know, kind of get those opportunities. Okay. Let me check on the questions. Doesn't look like there's anything new. So we're going to go back to my guide. But you see, we've kind of walked through our process. We created it in Google Docs. We downloaded it, did a little bit of editing in Sigil. Then we went into Calibri, which enabled us to actually put it so we can find it, add some metadata, etc. And we were actually able to change formats and do a little bit of fiddling with it. So let's go back to our class and talk about some other sorts of things. So this was creating ebooks 2. We worked through this, and I have, you know, there's Sigil there, there's a page edit add-on. Like I said, this is a little bit complicated. So you really want to watch this YouTube video because it's not just a matter of downloading it. You have to kind of fiddle around with things. And there's this longer ebook video right here. This one is longer. And here is the user's guide, which I should read. And then also Mobile Reads is a big community for people who love ebooks, and they actually have a forum for asking questions about Sigil. Okay, here's Calibri, here is it, here is the help, here is their blog. Let's talk about some other things. Now, there's a way of creating ebooks that I didn't do, and that actually is to start them in Microsoft Word, save them as a filtered web page, because remember, that's what ebooks essentially are, and then open them in something like Sigil or Calibri and start editing. And I didn't do that because it's a little bit more complicated. But it's good to know Microsoft Word doesn't have a direct EPUB download, but Apple Pages does. And in fact, they used to have a separate tool called iBook Author, but now they incorporate it into Pages. And so I actually like this page because it actually gives you some of the it gives you some of the relevant features in Apple's Pages that are helpful for actually creating an ebook. So it's kind of handy to actually have that. If you are really into open source software, LibreOffice is a freeware version of Microsoft Word, and they also have an extension that will allow you to save things as eDocs. Finally, I'm ignoring the validators. Here's some resources for their study, which is basically learning, HTML and regular expressions. And then if we move over to, oops, I'm in the wrong version of this. I'm actually in my version here. Whoops, how did I do that? Let's get out of here. Let's go move this over. Let's just open it up. And I opened up the wrong window. That's what it was. Luckily, I kept it here. Okay, so we're going to then go over to creating eBooks 3. And creating eBooks 3 is basically about other sorts of things. Scrivener is a really cool bit of software that enables you to do, create extensive documents in really cool ways. You can download things in EPUB. Adobe InDesign, really expensive, hard to use. I'm kind of curious about this one, Juta. It's about $50. Scrivener is about 70, if I remember correctly. I might actually check it out. Ebook platforms, Amazon, a lot of people swear by actually just creating an ebook in Kindle Create. I was hesitant to actually show that because I have not had a chance to carefully read through the tables of the terms of service. And it may be that if you create something in Amazon Kindle, that you have to sell it on Amazon Kindle. So that would be something, but this would, if you want to actually create an ebook for people to read, it actually isn't that complex. We didn't deal with validation. Ours is pretty basic, but basically if we learn to kind of create things on new pages and have a table of contents, that would be basically an ebook, the kind of thing that I read all the time. Smashwords is an indie ebook place. They have some resources for creating ebooks as well. And they have an ebook, of course, of their own style guide and some information on how to publish. CreateSpace is basically a vanity press, but you can create a physical book or an ebook. And then Readsy is kind of interesting. It's basically a community for ebook. It's a great place to go if you want to find someone to create an ebook for you once you have the content. But they also have their own create ebook tool called, which I have not kind of played around with it very much, which is their, it's going to sign me in here. They have a Readsy book editor, and I'm really curious about that, but I have not actually played around with it at this point. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Let's go back to our page and see if people have any questions. Question away.
Yep, so please feel free to leave any questions in the chat. In the meantime, I did want to confirm, so if you use tools like Sigil and the other one that you mentioned, you can use your own content, right? It's safe to upload that.
Absolutely. It's your own content. It is yours. So the thing that I used was actually, out of copyright. But yeah, I mean, and the nice thing about those two is Calibri and Sigil, they're not in the cloud. They live on your computer. So it's not like that, it's not like that upload site that I showed you. Everything you do is done on your computer and it's safe. No one's gonna be able to access it. So you can, if you want, well, do other sorts of publications. Cool. So, I'm actually, I really feel like there's a lot of really cool things that you can do with this. Once you're aware of how relatively easy it is to do the basic ebooks that I'm talking about, you're going to start thinking about how this is something that you can incorporate into, into what you do, So you could, at a minimum, you can, write up the story of your life for your mother or your grandmother or something else like that. And if your story changes, we've seen how you can go in to Sigil or Calibri and actually edit the story of your life as well.